My name's Kenneth Grange. I'm a designer of all sorts of stuff, and among the stuff is one of these black cabs. The visual changes principally were to, I think, gently soften the outlines, but at the same time aim to get a nice coherence between these different parts of the form. Now, the style is a lot to do with perception, a lot to do with what you want people to feel about the thing, and particularly if it's a question of comparison, if it's a newcomer against the old and familiar and loved objects, then you have to be very wary about upsetting the affection that people have between one and then its successor. The team who were going to really make this come about as a finished product were looking at the opportunity that comes up like once in every 20 years, and therefore were probably looking to much more dramatic changes to the vehicle that they were presently making. What I was able to do was to come along and recast their thinking to make it much more to do with the customer's viewpoint. And the customer, in my mind, needed to be absolutely confident that this was not much changed from the car that their advisors had told to look for and place their faith in. Its predecessor would have been, had I not poked my nose in, the predecessor I think would have been more stylish, perhaps more to do with reflecting the then fashion that was coming along, of which the Range Rover, the Range Rover models, the People Carrier was really in its entry then, and so that would somehow naturally seem to be a stylistic route to go. I was arguing for the thing to be much more reflective of what its merits had always been, which is a comfortable, familiar object in the street. The major details of the underlying functional requirements was the question of access for the customers. And although you don't see it immediately, just look at the height of this door, where the opening is almost the whole height of the vehicle. The consequence is you've got a really unlikely height, of generous height for the customers to benefit from. I mean, those are the inescapable merits of this thing over anything else in the street. If you looked at the wheels on almost any vehicle along here, you'll see that they don't have this strong projected bubble on the outside of the wheel. And my recollection is that it was an obligation that came with that wheel construction. And we were not allowed to alter it in the slightest. So it's a detail, and only those passionate about it would spot it even. But if you were to compare the wheels on all these vehicles on this street, you'll find this wheel is a very different looking wheel. Many parts of the car were bought off the shelves from somewhere. And so the tradition had always been that, the rear lamps, like everything else, you bought from somebody else's brand. But on this occasion, we were allowed to have a specific design for our new car, which is a nice treat. But at the same time, we saved half of the typical cost by making exactly the same part fit both on left and right hand. So that's a sort of detail only a designer would even bother to talk about, I guess. But it's our world. In this country is not famous for its modern design. If you went to Stockholm or Copenhagen, you'd soon come to realise that you are in a modern place, and almost everything in sight is up to date and functioning very well, and just that number of years up to date. Here you wouldn't expect that, except in terms of public transport, where I think we've got a wonderful heritage. Railways, aircraft, Certainly buses, and certainly the black cab, certainly that side of life in this country has actually been an unbroken modernism. So it's a nice background against which to work, and to have a job come along, which is where I was lucky, which gives you a chance to have a hand in that modern scene with a good heritage. That's a very attractive world. Well, the future, of course, of this vehicle, the black cab, is a very interesting discussion. I think, personally, I think it's got a long way to go. I think we've got miles of goodwill built into the expectation of what these things are. But the fact is that the likelihood of change, mechanical change, is going to speed up at a great rate. The 20 years I talked about, which was the gestation period for these models, is likely to be halved and a quartered, just because of the technology. As more and more reliance upon other power sources, electric power, as long as that comes along, they themselves have their own interest. Those industries have their own interest in constantly upgrading, constantly developing, and it's going to affect the products that then use those systems. And so I think whilst we'll be wise, I think, to keep the personality of these vehicles fairly constant and not shocking. That's a good basis, but what it'll become functionally, I think, is likely to be changed quite often in the future.